Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming along. What I just said was you can tweet today. You can put your phones on silent, but our Twitter account is Inspirational You. So it's inspirational and then _you. And the hashtag for today is IY Law Debate. So if you're going to tweet, you can include that hashtag so that we can follow up. And those who are not here today, because we do have a waiting list of people that wanted to come along as well, but at least they can follow the debate and your feedback and your comments via Twitter, because hopefully that's one of the mediums that was used to get most of you here today. But we're really pleased to be here. I have to thank Ben from the Supreme Court for allowing us to come along. Inspirational You relies on individuals like Ben and organisations and individuals like our speakers to support Inspirational You. We are a voluntary organisation, and we set up because we want to look at ways in which we can try and educate and empower, and also trying to look at ways to provide networks for yourselves to be able to meet one another, as well as looking at how we can start to move ourselves forward in such a difficult climate. We are very fortunate. We are today sponsored by the Runnymede Trust, and we have Rob Barkley here who's going to say a few words about Runnymede, and hopefully you will also sign up to support Runnymede as well as get involved in some of the events and discussions that they hold, because they are absolutely fantastic. So we really appreciate them coming along and supporting us today. Our panel consists of, we have Kieran. Kieran works here at the Supreme Court. I'm not going to do the introductions, I'm going to let them speak for themselves so that you can actually hear who they are and what they do, because I myself couldn't sell them, and I am really humbled that they are all here. We have organised this event in a real short space of time, so to get so many fantastic panellists here in that period is amazing, and most of them know very little about Inspirational You, and they just understand what we're about in terms of giving and supporting one another. So today, we have Kieran, we have Andy Hall, we have Courtney Griffiths QC, we have Gary Green, we have David Nita, we have Del Simon, and we have Sandy Okoro. Some of them are on Twitter, but if you search their names, you can tweet them, because if you are unable to speak to them today, social media is how you can also get through to any of them as well. So I'm not going to yabber on too long. I will just speak briefly at the end. I do hope that you've got an evaluation form again. It's really important for us to get your feedback, so if you don't have one, then do let us know so that we can give you one at the end of the night, so that we can capture what was okay, what wasn't okay, and what else you'd like us to cover in 2012. So if I hand over to Ben, and then Ben will hand over to Rob, and then Rob to Gary, and we'll begin. Thank you. Oh no, you can't tweet yet? But no, thank you very much. Over to Ben. Yeah.
Great, all right, thanks Sonia. Well, good evening. As Sonia said, my name is Ben Wilson. I'm Deputy Head of Communications here at the Supreme Court. For those of you who didn't meet me just on the tour just now. Sorry for those of you who didn't get a chance to do a tour. You're very welcome to get in touch with us, and we can provide tours for school and college groups, or you can book onto guided tours on Friday, so feel free to do that if you didn't have a chance to look around earlier. Obviously, this is the highest appeal court in the land. It took over from the law lords who sat over the road in the House of Parliament in 2009. I won't say anything more about that because most of you aren't here to hear about the Supreme Court. A couple of very quick health and safety things. If you do hear the fire alarm, there's certainly no fire drill intended. Plans, that's what I'm going to say. If you do hear the fire drill, just head out the nearest exit and work your way down to the main doors. As normal, the lifts won't work, so don't try and use them. And then go out to the main front doors of the building, take a right and take a right again, and we'll take you from there. Just follow us out. There are toilets out the main doors on the left-hand side. As Sonia said, refreshments will be served between 8 and 9. Feel free to stay around and mingle in the lobby, but please don't wander around the rest of the court because we'd hate for you to get lost. We're really pleased to have you here this evening. diversity is a real issue for the judiciary at the moment, and it's something that's high up the political agenda as well. Some of you will be aware a select committee is looking at that very topic at the moment and seeing what more can be done to make sure that talented people of whatever background are able to become our top judges. You're not really here to talk about judges this evening, but I do hope you judge it a success. And I'm going to hand over to my colleague Kieran. Kieran is one of our judicial assistants who will just say a little bit more about what he does here at the Supreme Court and how he's got to where he is today.
Hi, my name's Kieran. I am one of 7 assistants to the Supreme Court Justices forming the Lords here at the Supreme Court. There are 10 Supreme Court Justices and there are 7 of us, so that means 1 or 2 of us manage or assist 2 justices rather than just 1. I assist Lord Brown, who's one of the more senior judges, and Lord Mounts, who's slightly less senior. Each of us spends a year here. Our role is to act as the judge's assistant in I suppose in a general sense. Any research they need doing, any notes of advice on particular areas of law they need completing, we do that. But also, we're, in a sense, they're advisors. Often they want to have a sounding board before a hearing, during a hearing, after a hearing. They want to throw ideas around. Being a judge can be a very solitary business. And the benefit of us being there is that we are able to sit in on hearings with them, we prepare the hearings for the judges, and we discuss the hearings, the merits of the hearings after the hearing with our judges as well. So it's an amazing opportunity. It's a privilege to be able to be behind the curtain and to see justice in action in the process of being made. We also sift through the hundreds of applications which the court receives every month for permission to appeal from the Court of Appeal. And our role is to summarise the applications, give a view on the merits of the applications, and those go to the judges, and then we again sit on the hearings they have to decide which cases to allow to appeal and which cases to refuse it to appeal. My route here has been fairly unconventional. I started life as a solicitor after I first left university, having studied law and history. I was a commercial solicitor for a number of years. I then transferred to the bar, to the criminal bar, and did a pupillage at the criminal bar. At the end of that, a few years ago, I decided that commercial work was more, I suppose it suited me more. And so I went back to university, did a commercial law master's, and I'm here now, and I'm going to go after this year to the commercial bar. So a slightly unofficial path, but I suppose it illustrates that one doesn't always have to start where one intends to finish. It's very possible to start life in law as a solicitor, to transfer to the bar, within the bar to transfer within the profession, different parts of the profession. The law is a very fluid profession, and there are increasing opportunities for everyone to do what they want to do after a bit of trial and error. Why I would encourage people to turn to a career in law: if you enjoy problem solving, I think that's a very good start. If you enjoy resolving disputes and solving problems between people, that's also a very good start as well. Again, I think there are different qualities and attributes and incentives and motivations for every area of law and of the bar. As I'm sure my colleagues here will point out, if you're at the criminal bar or human rights bar, you're likely to be motivated by a sense of perhaps social injustice, human injustice, more than if you are in a more commercial end of law, where an interest in solving complex problems might be your most motivating factor to do that. But I think I'll leave it there, unless there are any questions, because I know there's a lot to be said by the people sitting on my left and right. Are there any questions about anything I said? Yeah, right back there.
How does one go into working as an assistant for a judge? What you're trying to do?
For an assistant for here?
Yeah.
So I probably should have said, it's open to anyone who's a qualified solicitor or qualified barrister. So you have to do your initial training contract as a solicitor or complete a period of pupillage as a barrister, and then you can apply. And I think broadly the court receives about 200 applications a year for the 7 places. So it's competitive, but it's certainly worth having a shot if you're a qualified solicitor or barrister. And I know for a fact that they're very keen to encourage people from all kinds of backgrounds, and I think that the current crop are a real sort of there's no real consistency in terms of where people have come from. There's one girl who's formerly a journalist for the Financial Times, who's now a barrister. Another guy who initially drove lorries for about 4 or 5 years before realising he wanted to have a career in law, and so he went off and did his A-levels, did a law degree, and he's now working here. So it really is open to anyone, and the 7 are decided on the basis of merit, application, and interview day.
Great. Kieran, thanks ever so much for joining us this evening. I know you can sit on, but thank you much appreciated. Before the panel discussion proper, as Sonia mentioned, Rob Barkley from Money Trust will now say a few words.
And a very few words. It's great here, isn't it? It's my first time in here. It's a pretty fantastic building. I don't know if you know that part of the design of this great new building, this great Supreme Court, was done by Elsie Owusu, architect. So actually, black people have been involved already in designing this space, and long may it be in the justice that's dispensed here. I am director of the Money Trust, and it's a think tank which has been focused on issues around racism and racial inequality for the last 40-odd years. And our founders were inspired by, encouraged by Martin Luther King to set up the British civil rights movement. And they thought, well, the British people are a smart bunch. We'll start with a 5-year project, and then racism will be gone. We're here a little bit longer than that. I suspect we'll be here for a little while longer, but we're not an organisation that's keen to be around forever. Our ambition is to end racism rather than just manage it. Our ambition is to see people from all backgrounds and all the talent represented in our society at all levels of decision making in our society. And I think the judiciary and the law is a crucial space in which we'd be very keen to see many more people from minority ethnic backgrounds. But we're currently in a situation where that isn't as true as it ought to be. So amongst our senior judges, there are 160 odd of them, only 4 of them are from minority ethnic backgrounds. So we've got some way to go. Also importantly, when you look at that group of judges, bigger than just the senior judges, only one in 5 of them didn't think it was necessary to bother filling in their ethnic monitoring form, which suggests we have some way to go winning the argument that the issues around dealing with racism and promoting racial inequality have some way to go amongst that group as well. It's crucial that our institutions open up to all the talent, because you'll have heard in the Chancellor's statement yesterday, this isn't an easy time for this nation, and it's going to need all the talent that it has within it to make sure that we respond to the challenges in front of us. So there's a case for effectiveness around making sure that we have a more diverse legal system for people working in it from more diverse backgrounds, as well as that moral case about making sure that we deliver a way which is fair and transparently so, seen to be fair. What I'm really pleased about is that we have a fantastic panel here of people who are at the top of their game. And I've met some of them and look forward to meeting others. And I think we're in for a really good panel discussion. So all is not lost, despite the figures looking bad. I think we are in a hopeful position. I should recount this story very quickly. When I was 16, I wanted to be a barrister, and I ended up speaking to the careers advisor at school, who said, "Well, barrister, that's a bit of a tough one for people like you. And are you sure you're not setting your sights too high?" Now that passed for careers advice a few years back, and I'm sure that other people recognise that story of being told that you can't do that. I came to my senses and decided that I'm going to work in politics instead. But I think that pattern of people being told you can't has to stop, and we have to find ways of making that stop, and this is a really good way of doing that. So great thanks to Sonia and her team Inspirational You and to the Supreme Court for offering this fantastic space for our discussion this evening. I would encourage you, if you can, to visit the Money Trust website. We have a network called Money 360, which is for new and emerging and existing leaders in terms of race equality, who are working together using their networks to share so that we can go forward to end racism in this generation, rather than my successors sitting here in 40 years' time saying what do we have to do next to end racism. So I would encourage you to have a look at that and to consider joining that network. But really over to Gary and to the panel, and look forward to your discussions this evening.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Well, welcome to the rather august surrounding the Supreme Court. What you six haven't appreciated sitting there is that's where barristers ordinarily arguing their points of law. In fact, we're going to ask you right now to argue the Equality Act 2010. Come forward. First of all, can we have a welcome from the audience? I just want to check that you've all got good posts. Welcome. Audience, are you here? Welcome. Can we hear some feedback? Audience, I'm going to ask you again. Welcome. Can we have a welcome? Thank you. I just wanted to check your pulse because although this is, a fairly static, dry area, law, generally speaking, this is also Inspirational You. And as Sonia has already indicated, having introduced Inspirational You, this is about providing support, about empowerment, and about providing vision and inspiration. It actually does what it says on the can. Can I just check in the audience, please? If we've got undergraduates here, I just want to see what the audience is made up of. Can I just see some hands if we have undergraduates? And it might assist our panel in answering questions as well. Postgraduates. Is anybody actually undergoing either the LPC or, I'm not quite sure what it's called now, BPTC at present? You again? Alright, sorry. You may have finished your postgraduate, you may not still be in that, sorry, I'm confused a little bit. And anybody in practice at the moment? Junior practice, early years of their practice? Anybody seeking training, whether pupillage, training contract? There seem to be perhaps some hands that weren't going up, or people thinking about a career in law or studying a law degree. Is that perhaps what others present are involved in? Okay. Well, we'll see. We'll see as we go during the evening. It's always good to just gauge the audience. And let's just firstly introduce our panelists very briefly. Although we shall start the introductions from the left, we'll start the conversation from the right. So to my furthest left, we have Sandy Okro. Have I pronounced that correctly? Just about. Global General Counsel at Baird, has been there since 2007. She was previously the head of legal at Schroders for a period of 17 years. I've asked her to given me no doubt a very impressive list of cases, but it's far too commercially sensitive to speak about. So I'll tell you instead that she appeared in the Black Panelist recently and is considered the 8th most powerful black person in the country. Round of applause, please. Gail Simon sits next to her, Director of Equality and Diversity to the Crown Prosecution Service, a role which she's held for a period of 2 years now. But prior to that, she was a Crown Prosecution lawyer, and before that, she was a lawyer in private practice. Her responsibility is to ensure that the Crown Prosecution Service does not discriminate either in their prosecution practices and or against their staff. That's Dan. Round. David Leiter, who in due course we'll find out has a wonderful, inspiring young man, and who is described perhaps most aptly as the people's lawyer. He's also a poet, and he's standing for mayor next year, May 2012. I don't know how many of you are fans of Boris, but I'm voting for David. Courtney Griffiths, Queen's Counsel, most recently seen cross-examining Naomi Campbell about her gold, diamonds and so forth and so on, has been in practice for a period of 30 years, has appeared in high-profile cases as much as Dan Zaminola Taylor, representing the first trial, and for those of you who perhaps remember the events of 1981, when there were disturbances, some called riots, in the Tottenham areas, Brixton areas. Strangely, we seem to have those back. Representative Winston Silcock in the allegation of murder against Police Constable Blake. That's Courtney Griffiths, Queen's Counsel. And last and certainly not least, Andrew Hall, Queen's Counsel, Chair of the Callister Trust, which I think he may wish to just express a few words about in due course. He's been in practice at the bar for 20 years, a criminal defence barrister. Similarly, some very high-profile cases. July the 7th bombing. I should say he was a solicitor for 10 years before joining the bar. July the 7th bombings, Wajid Khan, an Al-Qaeda website case, and also involved in the Tottenham 3 case during the 80s. That's Andrew Hall QC. It's always my purpose in chairing events of this nature, really to give the audience the opportunity to ask questions and perhaps recount any of their experiences, but in brief. So in due course there will be some questions, but for the time being, I'm just going to ask each panellist to give a brief outline, please, of their career journeys, their backgrounds, their roles, and some tips for success. So if we can start first of all from my right with Andrew Hall, please.
Okay, the first thing I'm going to say to you, you're going to find really difficult to believe. I'm a lot older than I look. Obviously I'm not as old as Courtney. But I've been around for a little while now. And when I graduated as a law student from Birmingham a little while ago, the options for me were pretty limited. Hey, I'm the white guy. Even in those days, it was not easy to make a career at the bar. And the standard profile for a would-be barrister would be someone whose father was a barrister, certainly not whose mother was a barrister, or whose father was a judge. And the career path was, Eton, Oxford, spelling the guards, and then you read for the bar. That's what people did. And you paid your pupil master in those days, rather than hoping to be paid for your training. And so for the son of a fisherman, because that's who I am, it was not something that I was in a position to take on. And like a lot of bright working class kids in those days, I was discouraged from biting off more than I could chew. As bright working class kids today are being discouraged by having to face the enormous financial debt of studying and doing postgraduate work. And so I took a slightly odd route to the bar, like others before me. I first of all worked in a law centre as a paralegal doing juvenile crime work. I then transferred into a solicitor's practice where first purely legal aid high street practices were being set up in London. I was in a pioneering firm run by a very significant figure called Henry Hodge in the legal world. Some of you may have a distant memory of him. And eventually, when the time was right, when I built up the confidence and the contacts and my skills, then I transferred to the bar to do what I wanted all my life to do, which was to stand up and represent people in criminal trials. And the interesting thing for me was that the thing I felt in those years of being exposed as not being quite one of them, I always imagined that someone would point at me one day in court and say, well, actually, he's not one of us, you know. But that didn't happen to me. The criminal bar was fantastically welcoming. It's one of the positive messages I want you to take away from this evening, that sometimes institutions and people are more embracing and supportive than you would think from the outside. Because within 10 years of moving to the bar, I was appointed Queen's Counsel. Within 12 years, I was made the leader of the criminal bar. And I've not really looked back since, although obviously I'm now in decline as I get old and weary. And the other thing I want you to take away is that the bar has fundamentally changed. These days, 54% of new entrants to the bar are women. When I first considered coming to the bar, there were some women, but not very many, and they weren't made terribly welcome. And the judicial profile we see now is a reflection of that reality. There were some black people and some people from other minority ethnic backgrounds, but they really had to struggle very, very hard in those days. Now, 19% of new entrants to the bar come from black and minority ethnic backgrounds, as opposed to 9% in the general population. That is a fantastic thing. And one of the things which makes me immensely proud of being at the criminal bar is when I look around the bar mess at the Old Bailey and I see the future generation of stars at the bar and the future generation of judges. It's astonishing to look down here and have a vision of this being the Supreme Court in 10 or 15 years' time, seeing these faces sitting here. But it remains a possibility. And those of you who are interested in the career at the bar, I can only speak of the criminal bar, will find that if you have energy and ability and talent, your background won't matter. You will be embraced and supported by your colleagues, and you will find it a welcoming place, notwithstanding its slightly unwelcoming reputation. It's not like that. And I really want you to understand that. That's not to say that things aren't tough at the moment, particularly for new entrants to the bar. People come in typically these days with 40, 50 or 60,000 pounds worth of student debt. The postgraduate course at bar school now costs between 10 and 15,000 pounds, depending on when you do it. You have to borrow money for all of that. 1,500 graduates are turned out of bar school every year, and this year there were nationally less than 350 places. So as a 2-1 graduate, having passed bar school, having funded your way through, you've got about a 1 in 3 or 1 in 4 chance of getting a training contract, whoever you are, whatever background you come from. So it's unbelievably tough. And when you get in, fabulous if you want to go to a commercial bar. I embrace my brothers and sisters at a commercial bar. They make a lot of money and they do incredibly well. Don't think it's going to be like that at a publicly funded bar, because it ain't. It's a very, very muscular life. I mean, I at Courtney run around the country doing terrorism and murder after murder after murder. We work 7 days a week when we're in a trial, and we spend you know, 4, 5, 6 months of the year, living out of a suitcase in some hotel in Manchester or Bradford, and we get home one day a week. Don't go into it if you're faint-hearted. But if that sort of life in the fast lane appeals to you, I have to say that when a jury comes back and says not guilty, it is the most thrilling thing you will ever experience in your life. And the moment when it becomes less than incredibly thrilling, you should give up and retire and go off and do something more gentle. It's a fabulous life, and we get paid for doing it. So if it's something you want to do, you have to be incredibly committed to it, and you have to be really determined and positive. But if you are, you will succeed. If you've got talent, you'll succeed. And there are organisations like the Inns of Court who have lots of money that you can access in the form of scholarships. You just have to have the determination to apply. And organisations like Calisher, which is a charity set up in the name of Michael Calisher, a very fantastic criminal barrister who died sadly very young. We set up a trust in his name. We provide scholarships for people from the sort of backgrounds where they have lots of talent with no money. And we help as many people as we can with funded internships and scholarships and awards and prizes. But you guys have got to step forward and say, give me one of those. Instead of hiding in the background, you need to have the confidence to step up and say, I can do this job as well as the next person. Doesn't matter what my background is, doesn't matter what my parents did, it doesn't matter what my gender is. I can do this job and I want it, give it to me. And if you take that attitude, you will succeed. And in 20 years' time, the Supreme Court will look like this. But I can't do that for you. You have to do that for yourselves.
Thank you very much.
I just want first of all to correct something that Gary said when introducing me. I didn't represent Winston Silcock. He did. He was solicitor for Winston Silcock. I was led by Michael Mansfield for one of the juveniles. Forgive me. But it's interesting being back in this room, and I say back in this room because I've actually sat in or about this position as a judge because I'm a recorder of the Crown Court, and I've actually sat at Middlesex Crown Court when it was a Crown Court, virtually in this position. So it's interesting coming back and pretending for a couple of minutes at least that I'm a member of the Supreme Court. And what's interesting about that is this, that many people often see somebody like me in my position and assume that somehow I was born with a silver spoon in my mouth. Nothing of the kind. I am the second youngest son of a family of 8 boys and 1 girl. My father was a carpenter. My mother, for much of her life, was a housewife. I was born at 66 3/4 Chisholm Avenue, Kingston 13. My elder siblings went to Jonestown Primary and Trenchtown School. My father left Jamaica when I was 10 weeks old in 1955 to go on a boat to England, and as a carpenter, because there were so many opportunities in the construction industry in Coventry, because it had been literally flattened by the Germans during the Second World War. He settled in Coventry. We came to join him in 1961. We were put on a boat, we went around the Caribbean, picked up on the various islands. We sailed through the Strait of Gibraltar to Genoa in northern Italy, because it was an Italian shipping line. We were then put on a sealed train for 3 days across northern Italy, France to Calais. We couldn't get off the train during that time. I guess the fear was, as it is now, that we'd somehow pollute European culture if we managed to escape. We then got on a ferry from Calais to Dover, and on the boat train from Dover to Charing Cross round the corner, where I met my father for the first time to recognize him. I then grew up in a Coventry where we arrived in October, so we were taken around the precinct in Coventry so that we could be fitted out with winter clothing. And so you had my eldest brother, 15, all the way down to me at the bottom, walking around Coventry city centre, shopping. And white people would come up to my parents and ask if they could touch us, because it was regarded as good luck. And you know, we Africans are supposed to be the superstitious ones. But in any event, I passed my level plus and went to the best school in Coventry, and that was the Saving Grace. And it was the Saving Grace for this reason, and it's something that you will have to contend with at the bar, and indeed at bar school. You see, for the most part, working class kids who go to state schools aren't told that they're going to be running the country tomorrow. When you go to a public school, that's how you're told, that you will be a master of the universe. Now, in the school I went to, the teachers couldn't say, oh, you're all going to be masters of the universe, apart from you, Griffiths. So as a result, I grew up competing with these individuals, knowing that I was as good as, if not better than them. And one of the main lessons I learned from that experience was this: racism isn't my problem, and I'm not going to occupy my headspace with that distraction, because oftentimes it was used to distract you from your ambitions. And one of the things I've learned, yes, you cross a certain line and you're damn right, and you're a headbutt to. But for the most part, I am not interested. It's your problem. You get on with it and allow me to achieve my ambition. Now, I do primarily criminal defense work, although I have prosecuted. My old roommate, Kenneth MacDonald, now Lord MacDonald, who was the Director of Public Prosecution, persuaded me to prosecute 9 police officers for the death in custody of a black man up in Leicester a few years ago. And I have to report every single one of them was acquitted. So that was my only foray into the world of prosecution. But at the same time, when I came to the bar, because of my experience as a young black man, growing up with SUS, the SUS laws, the Vagrancy Act of 1804 as it then was, I came to the bar as a black man with the attitude that I only wanted to defend. Because having been the victim of police racism, I saw my role as taking the struggle of young black people out on the street into the courtroom. But I've changed. And I would encourage all of you not to think in those polarized terms if you're thinking of joining the profession. Black people do commit crimes, and they deserve to be prosecuted properly, whether the prosecutor is black or white. So please don't differentiate in that sense coming into this profession. But I do think that we as black people bring unique qualities to this job. There are 18 courts at the Old Bailey. On any given day, if you do a tour of those courts, I guarantee you that something like 80% of those courts are engaged in trying, in particular, young black men. Gary, who I'm leading, and Andrew and I are currently in court number 8, well, we've got a jury out in court number 8. 7 young black men, eldest aged 18, charged with the murder and attempted murder of 3 other young black men in Peckham last year, December. We have to accept this is a blight on our community. And what these young people don't seem to be recognizing is a basic principle in our criminal law called joint enterprise. And you know, when they're out on the street and they're a bad boy, and you know, you see them and they want to get in your face, that's one thing. Then they come to court, they get convicted of murder, and then you see them down in the cells afterwards. Mr. Griffiths, I don't mean to have to go, whatever. Too late, my friend. Too late, my friend. And the fact of the matter is, it's time that we as black parents take charge of our communities and ensure that when our kids are walking the street, you know where they are, who they're with. As my mom used to say, mind, friend and company, which means quite simply, what are you walking on the streets with? And I don't think we are doing enough as a community to ensure that those lessons are being learned by young people. And it's about time we did. Now, times have changed at the bar. I recall going to places like Leeds Crown Court, Mould Crown Court in North Wales, back in the early 1980s. And the sight of a black man in a wig would stop traffic, literally. And you know, you'd be addressing a jury, and you see the jury sitting there looking at you open mouth, and you'd know that they weren't listening to a word you were saying. They were just marveling at the sight of, what's he doing here? So I developed this little tactic. You go to places like Cheltenham Crown Court back in the day, and I'd say, members of the jury, I'd start off. You may think, looking at me, that I look like a pint of Guinness. with this white wig and this black face. And they look at me, hesitating for a moment, wondering whether to laugh, in case I took it as a racist gesture. And then I'd start laughing myself, and then that would break the ice, and they'd start listening. But times have changed, because now, the senior judicial in particular, the Master of the Rolls, Lord Neuberger, a couple of weeks ago, spoke publicly of the need for diversity. And so I do feel that they're committed to that. But I'm being asked to wind up. So let me say this. It is going to be difficult, as Andy says, at the bar, because it seems to me, particularly the publicly funded bar, is going to shrink over the next few years because of cuts to legal aid. I think the bar will become much more elitist and will revert back to a semblance of the privilege and elitism which characterized it when I first entered the profession. But don't be put off by that. Do not be put off by that at all. Because I'm convinced that if you have the talent and ability, and indeed the determination, you will succeed. And also, it's important that you think outside of the box. Qualifying here as a barrister opens up other possibilities. One of the things I learned from my work in The Hague defending Charles Taylor is that English-trained barristers are highly respected in that forum because few other lawyers globally have our courtroom forensic skills because of the way in which their professions operate. And so as a result, there are a number of international tribunals in The Hague, and you should be thinking about that as a possibility. The International Criminal Court, to which former President Gbagbo of the Côte d'Ivoire was transferred today, all of the defendants currently on trial there are black. All of the investigations currently being conducted are, guess where? Africa. So there's room there for people with our background to make a mark. The ICC provide paid 6-month internships. Get on their website, look at what's available, and apply for it. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
If I could move next, thank you very much, Paul. Very inspiring. I could move next to David Nita.
Thank you.
People's lawyer. And if I could just ask that I'm trying our best to stick to
time. That's a challenge for me. I'm going to keep time. In fact, I'm going to do it at 9.
We're going to have to wrestle it from there.
That's right. Yeah, just to say, I'm David Nita. Just a little bit about what I'm doing. I'm engaged in several fields. Law, obviously, poetry. I work in education. This is working in schools with young people, building confidence, developing leadership, and that kind of thing. Working in mental health field using poetry within the mental health institutions. I work in the nuclear industry, and I'm a lover of the arts and culture, and a big time supporter of it. So I just completed an MA in cultural leadership. So as you can see, I have a full plate. Put on top of that, I'm putting together a campaign to challenge these guys for next year's Chief Executive post of London, this city, great city. Little bit about my background, family background. I am last of 7 children, born and grew up in Jamaica, and there I went to church, went to school, and raised in the church in Jamaica, and it was a big part of my passion and my philosophy in life. My original career aspiration was agricultural science. My best teacher was, that my subject was agricultural science. I was so good at it that sometime when he couldn't come to school, he asked me to take over the class. I absolutely loved it. I wanted to have a career in agricultural science, and my mom forbid it completely, said that I'm not going to turn no farmer. And not only did she forbid my passion, but actually dictated the path in which I'd go, said to me that I have to study medicine. And I actually tried, I actually tried to do that. Law really is the consolation, because I failed trying to do medicine. And didn't get the subjects and all of that, still got into university, tried to do it, didn't really work out. Glad it didn't really work out, because I don't think I'd be a good doctor. She wanted me to do surgery. And some time ago I had to take my little niece to the doctor and the procedure. And some blood had to be taken. And there I was supposed to be looking after my niece. I fainted. And when the whole procedure was over, the doctor woke me up and told my niece, take your uncle home now. So I'm glad I didn't really enter into that. So really, law became the consolation prize as a kind of appeaser. I'm naturally an appeaser. And I thought, well, what better thing you can do with your life than give your parents a gift, particularly my mom, How did I get into this field? Well, I studied law, did the bar course here, of course, School of Law, and managed to get in my patch application lots of invites for interviews because the paper was very impressive, the application. But when I got to the chamber, sat down in front of the panel, I wasn't getting the pupillage. And what happened was that at the end, I had somebody in an interviewing panel, a black woman, who was very interested in what I was about. She asked me to a meeting. I thought I got the job. She said, you didn't really get the pupillage. There's no chance of you getting the pupillage. You're just too comfortable with yourself, is what she told me. You're too relaxed. You're using too much examples from Jamaica. If you talk about Shakespeare, that would have been good. But you can't talk about how you would defend people who are hard long-term criminals by talking about Bob Marley, talking about once a man, twice a child, and all of that. Not going down too well. Get rid of all of that, some of that culture, so you can get a pupillage. I thought, what a thing, that's a story. But I was told by a white woman advising us to get pupillage to be yourself. And she said that white woman wasn't talking to you, she was talking to the majority of white students. White students can be themselves and get pupillage. You be yourself, you're not going to get a pupillage. Anyway, it was far too late. I would have needed her advice, but it was far too late. And by that time, it was my last interview and didn't get pupillage. But what really happened, my passion for poetry got me back into the law field, because I kept doing poetry at these open mic sessions, and sitting in the audience one day was another black woman who was a partner in a firm, and she said, we think you look good in our firm. We think you do very well, just the way you handle yourself. And it was a straightforward job, through the back door, no advertising. And that was just through a connection, and she saw something in me that she thought would benefit the firm. And I think there's a hint in there that, you know, if you are, you know, maybe the original white one is right, be yourself, eventually it will shake out. But if you can be both, I suggest be both. I absolutely suggest it. If you can convincingly be what you need to be to get into wherever you need to get into, you do that. I have great trouble doing it because I'm so Jamaican and so in love with my culture. I find it very difficult. But if I could, I would. And if you can, do so. Matters on diversity, that's pretty much it. Matters on diversity is about, yeah, your diversity is really a strength. For me, really, diversity is a strength. The top 3 tips I'll close with. There are 3. The first can be summed up in some, what I call acronyms. And these are poems. I've created poems out of them. I'm not going to read them as poems, but explain them. The first one is EYE. And you know, like you're a pupil, you want to be a pupil. The pupil is in the eye. But it really means enjoy your education. I would really suggest, if you're doing law because of your parents, don't do it. But if you choose to ignore that advice like I did, I chose to ignore it because of that, then the next step you need to do is to fall in love with it, right? It's like if you're stuck in a marriage and you don't, and there's a law that says you can't get out. The best thing is to fall in love with your partner. It's the best thing. So I set about falling in love with law. How do you fall in love with law? Well, I have another few acronyms for that. That is Phyllis and Philip. Fall in love in a subject, that's Phyllis. And fall in love with the professors, Philip. Now, it goes like this. Love is something you can decide. You can actually decide. So if you're sitting in school and you're doing all these subjects and you love criminal law, you love contracts, but you hate equity and trust, don't just take that for granted that you hate equity and trust. You can actually convince yourself that you love equity and trust and develop a different approach towards it. I guarantee you will score higher grades and do better in something you love. Not only that, you will learn better from people you love than people you don't like. Most of your professors, you probably won't like them. But the trick for you to do well in a subject is to fall in love with them. It's an active thing. And you decide, I'm going to love this professor. That funny accent I can't understand. That horrible way they dress. That way they discriminate. I'm going to love them. They're there for a reason. I'm going to learn from them. And in doing so, you fall in love with the subject. I guarantee you can even predict the exam questions. Because you love them so much, you begin to know what you're passionate about. You know them, you know somebody you love, you know what they're coming with. Women know this. If you love a man, you know what they're up to. The second advice I give to you is your unique talent. This got your talent. Everybody's got gifts and talents. Turn your gifts and talents into pounds and pence. It's a mantra. What it is that we've all got gifts and talents, and sometimes we ignore them. Somebody compliments you, say, oh, it's just a little old thing. Or it's just a little thing. It's not a little thing, it's a big thing. It's this thing that's going to earn you money. And whether you're working in law or not, what you need to do is discover what you're particularly gifted at. Because in that firm, or in that set of chambers that you are, you will stand out with your gift and your talent. You may have an appreciation for art. You're always talking about art, you're always talking about culture. You become valuable because of that passion. You know, or you might, whatever it is, you might just have an eye. You might just have an eye for design. Design has nothing to do with law, but every time you go in the office, you say, that picture will look better there. You're a natural interior decorator, and then you become valued for that. This is how it works. And then the last thing I'd say is to help out. Really, you must find a way to give something back. Whatever stage you are in the legal process, you must help out. Whether you're a student or not, you help out by, you may live near to a council flat. There is a old lady in that council flat who definitely need a letter written to the council for something. I can guarantee you. Just canvass the block and ask them who needs some help. Write that letter, help out. If you can't help out individually, you're too shy, get yourself associated with an organization, SBL, BSN, or one of these organizations. And just look at it. Inspiration is all around you. I don't think Sonia Mega is trained as a lawyer, but here she is engaged in law, taking us into the highest courts, the Supreme Court. If Sonia Mega, who is not in law, can inspire us and take us here and create a pathway and a career out of law, then you who are interested in law can do the same. Thank you.
Dan, follow that.
Right, thank you. Okay, good evening everyone. I'm Del Simons, you've heard I'm Director of Equality and Diversity at the Crown Prosecution Service, and I think what really struck me as we were going around the table is just how similar, the experiences, when Ben was talking about, the career advisors, when Courtney was talking about the need to believe in yourself and recognising, the differences when you're at school, that what might apply to others, and if you, believe in yourself, how far that can take you, and, just about the individuality. So, I think it's really interesting that irrespective, you can see there's a kind of pattern here, and although we all come from different backgrounds and achieved different things, I think we can all give account of various degrees of adversity we've had to overcome. Now, my particular story is that I'm the youngest of 5 children, first generation British from parents from the Caribbean. My father was from Antigua, my mother from Guyana. I have to give props to the other places because we all want to prop up Jamaica. So we have Antigua and Guyana in the house as well. And my father was a plumber. My mother was educated in Guyana, had a sort of a very good education, but then came to England and became a housewife. But she instilled in us a love of education, a belief in ourselves and our ability, because she came from an environment where she, her parents had done well, sort of middle class people. So she kind of didn't get the whole thing of hair and the barriers that you were likely to have to deal with. So she instilled in me from a very early age a belief that you can do and you can achieve if you want to. So grew up in the East End of London, didn't even have the advantage of getting into a grammar school actually, because I went to what was the old comprehensive schools. But with that belief in myself, and I had liked to think a little bit of intelligence, I got through a dreadful school process. I could bore you for hours about some of my discussions with career officers and teachers who just said, you're living in cloud cuckoo land if that's what you think you want to do. Anyway, eventually got my qualifications, was called to the bar in 1986. And you should all say at that point, you look far too young. Thank you. I was called to the bar in 1986. I spent my first 6 years in private practice doing mainly criminal defence, and I think that's probably where I first ran into Courtney, and then probably saw him again when I was back at the CPS. So I spent 6 years in private practice doing mainly criminal defence law. In 1992, I joined the Crown Prosecution Service as a prosecutor and moved through various roles there up into senior management. I'm just going to stop at that point because I think Courtney touched on it, the idea of, where I was coming from, East End of London, I very much wanted to get into criminal law. I saw myself as being a defence advocate. It was to deal with the injustice. I remember seeing my father, being assaulted, but then him being bound over to keep the peace, and that sort of thing. And I kind of grew up with this idea that I want to be there to right these wrongs. And after 6 years in defence work, you do kind of start to realise, actually there's two sides to the story. There are, there are the injustices which happen and continue to happen and which we must fight against, but also there are people within our communities who are criminals. So I lost that kind of, 6 years made me realise that what I was really interested about was justice and fairness, which probably leads me to how my path went from being a defence lawyer to prosecutor, prosecution manager. I had a brief stint at the Office for Judicial Complaints as the head of that department in 2006. Again, that got me into all kinds of things about what's happening in the judiciary and how it regulates itself. And then in 2009, took up my current post as Director of Equality and Diversity at the Crown Prosecution Service. And as you heard in that sort of the brief introduction, my role is really about trying to ensure that the CPS does not discriminate in the way, in its practices and policies, in the way that it recruits people, but also in the way that it treats its staff. So it's very wide-ranging in that. Just in terms of where I think the profession is at the moment, as I said, I joined the CPS in 1992. For those of you old enough to remember, the CPS had a very rude awakening into the world of diversity and equality around 1999-2000, when it had a number of adverse employment tribunals around discrimination in its practices. At that time, we were a service where, although we had quite a good representation of BME, all in very lower grades. You know, you had sort of lawyer grades, but no lawyer managers and that sort of thing. And it forced the finding, and there was also a report which found that the CPS was institutionally racist, similar around the time that we had the McPherson report around Stephen Lawrence. So there was a real injection of interest around, well, what is this whole equality and diversity thing? What do we have to do to change as an organisation to become better? And that's when I became involved with the work. But I, at that point, was still very much torn between wanting to be an advocate, wanting to have the hands-on dealing with cases, because there is a buzz. Once you get into the criminal law, it keeps you going. There's an energy about it. I always say to people, the job can be challenging, but it's never ever boring. So I had that. For me, that challenge between, do I want to move into this kind of management and policy side where I can really make a difference? I can look at our policies, I can say this needs to change, we need to look at our recruitment, we need to ensure that when we develop the advocacy panel scheme, that we looked at actually how do we ensure that some of the great diversity that we see in terms of people being admitted into the bar, and in fact, I mean, I think, Andrew, you mentioned something like 20%. I think last year's figures were 42% of the admissions to the bar were BME, like 42% BME. But if you fast forward 6 years, the profession, and you look at the profile of the profession, it's only 11% BME. So something's happening. It's not about ability, because clearly 42% shows the ability is there, in spite of all of the issues around funding and all the rest of it. The ability is there, but the profession still needs to change to ensure that we don't have that fallout. And that's a lot of what I'm focusing on the moment. I didn't check the time when I started. So I don't know where I am.
Just give us one more minute.
Right, okay. So I'm just going to give you now a couple of my tips for success. I would say first most important thing is know yourself and believe in your own abilities. And when I say know yourself, it's about having a real honest discussion with yourself. What are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? Play to your strengths. Don't think, well, I want to do X, but it's not your strength, or you want to do that because it might make more money. You have to play to your strengths. Know yourself, know who you are, be true to yourself, and play to those strengths. Secondly, be prepared to take opportunities in whatever form they present themselves. Courtney mentioned about thinking outside the box. If I look at my career path, defence law, then prosecution, then judicial complaints, then equality. For me, it's a continual journey. I've looked at things. I didn't have a game plan, but I've always just tried to make the best choices as they present themselves to me. Be prepared, have an open mind, particularly in this particular climate. And the final thing I would say, events like this, get yourself a mentor, network. David talked about, the good old nepotism that got him into. I mean, it still exists, so let's not pretend it's not there. You need to network. You need to meet with other professionals. That's me.
Thank you. Last and most definitely not least, Sam.
Good evening, everyone. Before I say a little bit about myself, I just have to say I am sitting in the Supreme Court. Sadly, both my parents have passed away now, but I'm telling you, they would die again if they saw me sitting here in this esteemed crowd, because it's something they've always dreamed of for me. And although I'm not sitting here as a judge, I'm sure it's only a matter of time. I grew up in Balham. Unlike everybody else on the panel, I'm actually an only child. And so I got a lot of attention from my parents, and my education, what I do, is absolutely key. And I think that's part of the reason for my success. My dad was a teacher and my mother was a nurse. My dad was from Nigeria and my mum was from Trinidad. And if any of you've got that background, I'll tell you that's the most mixed marriage you could ever have in your life. It meant that I was brought up in an atmosphere where you always spoke your mind, you always argued for what you believed in, and the food was always very, very interesting. As I said, education was a big part of my background, and I remember when I was about 8 or 9, I was in class and the teacher said to everybody, what do you want to do when you grow up? And I love this programme on telly that probably none of you remember, called Crown Court. Some of the people around here might remember it. And I thought, I want to be a judge. I want to be a judge. I want to sit there in that red thing and that thing on my head, and I want to decide what happens to people. Because I'm a bit bossy like that. And the teacher went round and said, you know, what does everybody want to do? And it was footballer, princess, astronaut, that kind of thing. And it came to me, yes, astronaut, really. My son actually still wants to be an astronaut, but there you go. It came to me and I said, I want to be a judge. And she turned around in front of the whole class, I was absolutely mortified, and said, Sandy, little black girls from Balham don't become judges. And at that point, I thought to myself, well, they do now. And it was at that point, it was a real turning point in my life, that I was never afraid to be the first or the only one doing something. And that has kind of been, when I look back on it, I didn't think about it at the time really, but when I look back on it, that's probably what my career has really consisted of. So I decided, obviously, to study law. I had a very straight path through. I went to Birmingham University as well, great law school. I actually studied to be a barrister, and I was called to the bar in 1986. Good year. Yeah, good year. But that was the first and only time I actually got cold feet about something, and for some bizarre reason decided I wouldn't make it at the bar and went to study to be an accountant. After a year, clearly I decided that adding up was quite important if you were to be an accountant, and it wasn't actually one of my skills. So I left that accountancy firm. It's actually Coopers and Lybrand then, it's part of PwC. And that was another thing I learned, is get good names on your CV, because actually it's easier to get a job the next time round. So I then retrained as a solicitor in a small private client firm, and then it was around the time of Big Bang, which you might have heard of, which actually created lots of jobs in the city. So I decided to go and work in-house at Schroders. And at the age of 25, I found myself managing a team. I was the only black person, let alone black woman, at Schroders at the time in a senior position. And I was managing a team of 8. And it didn't worry me. I thought, wow, that would worry most people. People said, how can you do that? I thought, you just do it. You turn up each morning, do your job, do it to the best of your ability, and don't let anyone see that you don't know what the hell you're doing. So that was my first. There were many others. One of the most significant ones was when I was made director at Schroders many years later. And I was actually the first black female to be made a director at Schroders. I was aware of this. They didn't notice, which I found a little surprising, but at the same time also quite gratifying, because actually it meant to them, it made no difference, although it made quite a big difference to me. I then was headhunted and went to work for Barings, and I'm probably one of the few female and female black GCs in the city. And the city is sometimes quite a difficult place for women and for ethnic minorities. And I would say that probably has been the case for most of the time in the city, but not of recent years. Things have changed, it's become tougher, it's become more about talent. And if you haven't got the talent and you haven't got the ability, you are not going to last in any job, be it at the bar, be it in local government, be it anywhere. You need talented people. And, you know, just because your dad was so-and-so, or your mum was so-and-so, you're not going to make it in that sense. So although I have challenges all the time, and often I walk into a room and people don't think I'm the GC, they think somebody else is the GC, and I have to explain, and that still happens. And I think that happens more because I'm female than it does because I'm black, if I'm honest. Because the city is still a very male-orientated place, and I'm often the only female in the room. And actually that can sometimes be an advantage because people have to remember that you were there. They can't say that, no, you weren't in the room at the time. So that can sometimes be an advantage. So diversity, for me, has been a double-edged issue in my career. It's also been about being female and doing what I do in the city, and also being black and do what I do in the city. And I really encourage and spend a lot of my spare time mentoring other young lawyers to give it a go. It doesn't matter if you're the first, it doesn't matter what anyone else has said to you about how difficult it's going to be. You have to align yourself and see yourself as successful. Times are hard now, and it's really easy to identify with the bits that fail. I was speaking to one young student recently who was saying to me, but there are a million young people who can't get jobs. And I said to her, well, don't identify yourself with that million that can't get a job. Identify yourself with some of the young people that do get a job. Because that's the start of success, is you have to identify yourself as a success. You have to see yourself as a success. Otherwise, you won't really see the opportunities that are there for you. I love the law. It's a great passion of mine. I still hold an ambition to be a judge someday, but I think somehow I've gone off the rails a little bit and gone in the wrong direction. But for all of you there who are thinking about a career in the law, it's going to be difficult because, as we've heard, the statistics are a little bit against you. It's going to be challenging financially for everybody going forward, but I would say it's worth it, and it's going to be hard. And anything worth having has never actually been easy. You ask anybody who has that, they have struggled. But when they get there, it's really, really satisfying. And always, I think, give of your best. I'm often asked, well, how do you do that? And I think if you give of your best, people will notice that. And don't be distracted by, as Courtney said, the racism. That's somebody else's distraction. People will try and tell you can't do it because, but you can do it because, and that's the thing. Think about what you can do. And last of all, I always like the quote by John F. Kennedy when they were looking at the missions to the moon. And he said they do it because it's hard, not because it's easy. And that's what I would say to you. Do it because it's hard, not because it's easy.
Fantastic. I really came to just host this panel this evening, but I have to say, even after 11 years of practice, I feel inspired again, almost to want to do my LLB all over again. Try and avoid that. Now, I want to move because I know time is limited, and I'm always looking for somewhere for Sonia, who's the boss, for perhaps some additional time. But I want to move to questions very quickly if I can. And we have one right from the front, and if you could just say who you are, please, and perhaps what position you're presently in, whether you're undergrad, postgrad, in practice, and who your question is directed to. It is a specific question, please.
I'm Leslie Marizwa. Before you find me guilty for lawyering the bar, excuse the pun, I'm actually not a lawyer or not involved in the industry, but I'm a passionate follower of current affairs. And with that in mind, perhaps my question will be directed at Courtney and Andrew, and I'm happy for the rest of the panel to participate. As somebody who's not a lawyer, I've always struggled with how you separate the job from the person, who you are. And I take Charles Taylor as an example. You've got piles and piles of evidence that, if you like, witnesses, things that actually point the finger at somebody being guilty before they're charged. And yet you go into that court and you put on your hat and you defend them to the kill. How do you go home and sleep? And as you said, at the end of it, the best feeling that you get is when the person is found guilty. How do you separate?
All right, can I take that question? Yeah. So emotional capacity, professional responsibility. Courtney and/or Andrew, please. Andrew, go first.
Well, I'm not the judge, and the reality is, although we form strong views about the guilt or the innocence of our clients, we very often get it wrong. And that's the lesson you learn from actually doing the job. I've done cases where I was absolutely convinced my client was innocent, and then I was subsequently given information which demonstrated that he or she absolutely was guilty, and the reverse. And the difficulty is that if you start to focus on the rightness of your cause, you will take your eye off the ball, and you're being paid to represent someone else. And the reason I do this job is that everyone, however appallingly bad they've behaved, has a right to be properly represented. And if they're guilty, they'll be found guilty by a fair tribunal. And if they're not guilty, then they'll be acquitted. And that's me playing my part in that very important system. And Court will tell you the same. We don't focus on whether our clients are guilty or innocent. We do the very, very best we can for them. And we are professionally pleased when someone is acquitted, even though we think they may well be guilty. You don't have to shake your hand when you say goodbye. Indeed, some clients I've not said goodbye to, and I've been glad to see back of them. But you know, it's the job and the role which is important, and doing that to the best of your ability that counts.
Court, it's one thing representing a single defendant at the Old Bailey for a single murder, as we are presently doing with attempted murder. What about when you're representing somebody who's been in Charles Taylor's position, accused of perhaps some of the gravest crimes known to humanity? How do you sleep at night?
Well, it's interesting that the questioner prefaces his question by saying there are piles of evidence against Charles Taylor. Who told you that? You haven't been following the trial I've been involved in, because there's hardly any evidence, and I mean that quite sincerely. And frankly, if that decision in Charles Taylor's case was to be made purely on the evidence, as far as I'm concerned, he should be acquitted. But the fact of the matter is the politics of that trial means that it will be very difficult for him to walk out of the court. And you know, I'm asked that question on so many occasions. But what people don't seem to realize is, stripped down to its basics, a barrister is a hired gun. You are a mercenary. You've been hired by a party to litigation to present a case. You are not there to make moral judgments. And in fact, it increases your difficulties if you go into that situation wanting to make moral judgments. I'm Charles Taylor's lawyer, not his conscience. And so consequently, I can go home and sleep very soundly.
Any other questions, please? I know there must be many. Yes, I see a hand there from a friendly face.
Yeah, my question is...
could you just say who you are and what your position is?
Yeah, sure. Gary Green and I went to bar school together. I'm Brenton Horn. I'm a practicing barrister. So I think you wanted me to say no. Anyway, my question is to David Nita, and it's in relation to your ambition to challenge for the London Mayor in 2012. My question is actually two. One, have you started your campaigning, or did it really start tonight? And two, what are the difficulties you've been encountering?
Very briefly, I have started a soft campaign by contacting people and sharing my views on vision for the city and so on. And did you say what are the difficulties?
Yeah.
I mean, I really don't see a difficulty, really. I mean, I think the choice will become clear in the campaigning. I mean, these guys that I'm campaigning against, they've got huge campaign machines and huge monies and all of that. But, you know, what is important is the running, laying out your items out on the menu of what you want for London. My motto is one London for all Londoners. I think what we have seen since elected mayors in the year of 2000 is one London for only some Londoners. And I want to change that chemistry. And I think we're going to have the same thing if one of these guys win. So I don't really see a difficulty. I'm very excited about it. I think if people are presented with the various manifestos, I think the choice will be clear in terms of what I'm offering. I'm offering an opportunity for all of Londoners to get involved in the process of London. not just the people who work in the city, not just the people who are well off, not just the people in some boroughs, but all 32 boroughs plus the City of London, getting engaged, getting involved. We're here in this city. We're here because of some kind of contacts in this courtroom. Most people, most youngsters don't have any access. Youngsters that have not been dealt with in both administrations. In terms of education, it has not been addressed. It's just been about transporting and police and all those policies. And some of them have been good, and I'm not going to detract from where it's been good. But there hasn't been anything done for the forgotten and the marginalized in London, and that's the majority. And those are the voters, and that's who I'm trying to appeal to. I don't see a difficulty at all, I just the opportunity.
Vote for them. I'm going to get some balance made. Question there, and if you could stand up, please, so that we can catch you on camera when you're asking your question. And perhaps if you just tell us who you are and what stage you're at.
Hi, my name's Buchi Asuji. I'm a student at London South Bank University, third year undergraduate. I just want to ask the barristers on the panel, what with the rising prices of the BPTC at the moment and the smaller amounts of places available, what would you say to young aspiring barristers out there that may think that they won't get a place, regardless of how talented they are or how much money they can scrape together? It just won't happen for them. What would you say to that?
Can I ask them, because both of you have been, and Sandy, both of you have been through the bar courses yourself, so the issue is funding. £15,000 now for the bar vocational course, or the BPTC as it's now seen.
Yeah.
We also have student tuition fees, and I've done my own research before I came here and found that virtually all of the universities are charging the maximum fees, £9,000 per year. So the issue of funding.
Yeah, the reality is, I mean, I think Sandy touched on it. She said, you know, you can look at the size, you can look at the challenge and associate yourself with those who aren't going to get through or those who will. So I mean, that's always going to be an issue. The funding issue, there are various scholarships available. I'm a member of a Temple this year. I sat on their scholarship interviews. I mean, what surprised me was that we had 25 scholarships to award, and we only had 84 applicants. I found that strange, bearing in mind what I hear all the time at these events is, it's so expensive. I'm like, how can it be? And these are kind of quite substantial scholarships. We're one of the inns where they actually look at a balance between, you have 2 awards which are merit irrespective of need, but all of the other awards we balance merit in terms of you know, academic excellence and need, and you have to score highly in terms of both to get a scholarship. And with us, once you get scholarship, once you get for your first year, I always get mixed up with the initials now, but if you do the LPC, you also get the scholarship to your BPTC or whatever it is as well. I should know them by the scholarship committee. So there are opportunities. I do think, I mean, I'm not going to say it's easy, but there are opportunities to get help. But my concern is really primarily that the cost is becoming really oppressive, and it is becoming a bigger barrier than class ever was. It kind of it's just kind of brought us full circle, and I'm so fortunate that I came up at a time where, you know, you could be poor and talented and succeed.
Sandy.
And I was the same. I didn't have those funding issues, but I understand that now they are quite severe. And I think that one of the things that worries me is that, as Courtney said, you're going to go back to a more elite system because people like you will think it's too difficult, I can't do it, this is an issue. And I would say, if you don't give up, and, you know, I said identify yourself as getting there and making it happen, look for all these, you know, do some research and look for where you can get funding through scholarships, etc. There are some out there, and I think if you really, really look, you may well stumble across something you weren't expecting in a really unusual place. One of the things I would also say to you is that, you know, if your dream is to become a barrister, then become a barrister at whatever cost that is, because you don't necessarily have to practice at the bar if you find that difficult. You can go in-house, there's so many things you can do, and of course there are opportunities, you know, to do other things, like maybe come here and work for one of the judges and some other things to fill in some time before you actually start your own practice at the bar, or do something completely different. But I wouldn't give up. I think that's don't give up yet, because you haven't exhausted all the opportunities. And it'd be a real shame if people like you and more people like you were giving up because of just the funding. That is just so unfair, and that's not going to create, a diverse bar.
I know we have many other questions, and I'm going to take another one at the moment. The issue of funding and debt is an important one. So I've got some figures here. I've done my homework. I've got some figures here, and I've got some figures that say 15% of students are leaving debt. This is 2009 to 2010, leaving university in debts of 20 to 29,000. 13%, 10 to 14,000. A small percentage, thankfully, 2.6 are leaving university with debts of 50,000. Now, Andy, I recall you mentioning Kalisha offering some scholarships. You don't want to miss the opportunity for scholarships.
Yeah, the scholarships are really important, but you've got to actively research them, and don't give up your dream without talking to one of us, and point them in the right direction. And having this sort of discussion is really important, because Kalisha, for example, Kalisha gives 2 or 3 scholarships a year and pays your whole bar fees for 3 students from we then have essay competitions. They pay £5,000, £3,000. So we're building up in 2012 to about 6 or 8 funded internships, which are with the Criminal Cases Review Commission. There are 2 of those which have recently been advertised. There are 2, there are going to be 2 with Justice, and at least 2 doing death penalty work and appellate work out in African jurisdictions. But we need people to step on and say, give me that money, okay? So don't you leave the bar without speaking to me first, okay? The other thing that's quite interesting, I was going, Barings is a bank.
No, we're not.
We're not a bank.
No.
Okay. I was going to.
No, we used to be before Nick Leeson, but
But you must know some bankers.
I do.
Yeah, well, you and I are going to have a conversation. Find you some money.
I should also tell you, having done some research, bursary schemes are available through the Law Society as well. And so, certainly when I was an undergraduate, there was a big charities book, and if any of you remember that, you had to trawl through it, you couldn't take it out of the library. One of those books that was chained. Nowadays, into Google, press bursaries, much more easier now to identify charities who are offering students money, and there are lots of them. Next question, please, and if you could just stand, please. But we'll take chivalry is not yet. We'll take please. Just say who you are, and perhaps what stage you are.
Okay, my name is Tamsira Nuitwa.
And you.
Okay, my name is Tamsira Nuitwa. I'm a 3rd-year law student from the Montford in Leicester, so I've come from Leicester today here. My question is to do with human rights law, because my parents are from Ogoniland in Nigeria, which are subject to a lot of oil spills for quite a few, some time now. So I've kind of been brought up with the activist mentality, like I think as you've mentioned before, Courtney, having that, wanting to like fight for, just wanting to fight for like people, rather than like prosecute. So I don't know, I just wondered what would be your advice on taking a career in human rights?
Career in human rights. So both Courtney and Andrew shaped and I actually are framed for human rights. So perhaps I could come to yourself.
I have difficulty with this concept of a human rights lawyer, because every lawyer should be a human rights lawyer, because human rights should be at the center of everything we do. And I think, to answer your question directly, it's important to bring that passion into the courtroom, right? It will inform your advocacy. It's not something you leave at the door of the courtroom. That would be the first piece of advice I'd give. But I think there's a broader issue which I'd like to address, and it's this. I think the 21st century will see a new scramble for Africa. And I think that what's happening in terms of the ICC is a return of neocolonialism. In effect, African leaders are being told, unless you toe the line, we will take you to The Hague and treat you like a criminal. And it's one of the reasons why the United States has now set up AFRICOM, Africa Command, and they're looking for a base in Africa because they appreciate that the resources in Africa are up for grabs now, because the Chinese are in there, the Brazilians are in there, the Indians are in there, and they need to protect their interests, particularly oil interests, along the Gulf of Guinea, stretching from Angola all the way to Gambia. And I say that to say this: there are opportunities in the legal arena in Africa which we ought to be looking at. We should not be limiting ourselves, particularly as people of African origin, just to the United Kingdom. There are opportunities out there, and that's what I mean about thinking outside the box. Because in several parts of West Africa, they have the very same common law system as here. In Sierra Leone, in Nigeria, in Ghana. So we've got to be thinking about those possibilities.
Dan, I just want to come to you because I want to pick up on something which was implied in the question about not wanting to prosecute. So does it mean, therefore, that all the good guys are on one side of this divide, are defending, and all the bad guys are on the other side? Dale, is that the position insofar as human rights law is concerned?
Not at all. And I think that in many respects, when we talk about wider principles like human rights, like equality and diversity, I think on the prosecution side, certainly for my role, in terms of setting policy, there is, firstly, a higher standard to be met. I can't just say I am dealing with my client, the police officer sitting in front of me. I have a wider principle. I think in many respects when you're defending, you have to just deal with that individual. You have to give them your professional. As a representative of the prosecution of the state, actually human rights and equality and diversity has to be at the heart of everything. I'm not saying it isn't at the heart of, and I think Courtney makes the right point, but in effect, if you're talking about systemic, how do you deal with these issues? You can't rule out the prosecution side of it. We play a very important part in terms of, Article 6, right to a fair trial, etc. These principles run through the prosecution as much as they do with the defence.
If I could just take Andy briefly on that question also.
Well, I just going to respond to that. Fair trials start with the prosecution. However good your defence lawyers are, if the prosecution side is corrupt or incompetent, you will not get a fair trial. At the moment, one of the best human rights lawyers in the country, one Keir Starmer of my parish, is the Director of Public Prosecutions. There you go. But just to give you some practical, you've disappeared from my eye line now, just a bit of practical advice. Not many people make a living from being human rights lawyers, but we are all human rights lawyers in our own way, particularly people working in crime. But there are very powerful organisations of lawyers. The Bar has a human rights committee, the Bar Human Rights Committee, does some fantastic work around the world, and particularly in Africa. I used to run the Africa section of the Bar Human Rights Committee. I did capacity building work and human rights work in I think 30 African jurisdictions. And what we're doing then is bringing our skills and our talents to bear on intractable problems in other jurisdictions, and we're supporting our colleagues in those jurisdictions who really are the human rights lawyers, because they're up against it, it's in their face, and people are getting, when shit hits the fan, they go for the lawyers first and then they go for the journalists. And so we have colleagues in other jurisdictions where the legal processes are not legal, and where you can get hauled off in a van in the dead of night just for doing your job. A very important part of what every one of us has to do in our profession is to reach out to those people, because it's an enormous encouragement to people I know, people who know, and we all know, working in really tough parts of the world, that we're keeping an eye on them and watching their back and helping out where we can. So you probably won't make a career out of it unless you're Keir Starmer, and maybe you are, I guess no. But there's a great deal you can do, not least in your mother country, because there's a great deal of work going on there now through the Bar Human Rights. Get on the net, go to their meetings, and they'll grab your arm off if you want to do that sort of work.
I'm going to go back to the question. Yes, please, you sir.
My name is Odell Warman, and I've completed BVC in 2009-2010. I currently work at the Financial Ombudsman Service. Essentially, my question from a selfish point of view, I suppose, is in terms of practical and pragmatic advice. How can I land pupillage? I've worked at a solicitor's firm, I've been to Crown Courts, and I've seen advocates of varying standards. I am confident that I can complete the job, but it seems there's a bottleneck where pupillage is concerned. How do I breach that? How do I get in? That's my question.
Well, the long and short of it is, there's huge competition out there. You've got to make yourself more interesting than the next guy. Getting through the paper sieve is the first really big hurdle. We have, I think, 3 pupillages at Dash Street. Every year we get 600, 700, 800 applications for those 3 places. And just getting your application seriously considered is an enormous great threshold to cross. And so you've got to work really hard on making your application stand out. And that's why organisations like Panelist, as well as giving people a financial leg up, are trying to create opportunities, particularly for people from non-traditional backgrounds, to build the sort of confidence and to build the sort of CVs that people from more privileged backgrounds simply take for granted. They've all done gap years, or they've gone off with Uncle Charlie, who's a High Court judge, and the usual stuff. You've got to, if you really want to go for this, you've got to create those opportunities. You've got to be connected with organisations, like the Bar Human Rights Committee, if that's the field you're interested in. You've got to network with people, you've got to write stuff, you've got to put your face about. It's not an easy journey. But you can get there in the end. If you want it enough, you will get there in the end.
I just want to underline what Andrew has said. At Garden Court Chambers, where I'm a member, we offer 6 12-month pupillages a year. And on average, we get between 800 to 1,000 applicants for those places. I've been involved in the sifting process. And what happens is, because of the number of applications, volunteers in chambers are given, say, 30 applications to work through. Now, when you're in court all day and you've got prep to do, the reading of those applications is really not as detailed as one would expect. So, effectively, your application has to lead off the page. And you need also to research the chambers you're applying to. For example, if you're applying to Garden Court Chambers, we're not particularly interested if you went to Oxbridge. What we're more interested in is other work that you've done, particularly work of a political nature, outside of the legal profession or outside of the law. So research the chambers you're applying to. What kind of work do they do? Who are the personalities in those chambers? You go to one of the chambers of partners or one of the guides, look them up and research them properly so that you know how to be selling yourself to that particular set of chambers.
Sandra, I just want to observe, if I can, another question which may touch on the same subject and just ask you about training contracts and whether or not you can offer any advice about the application for training contract and securing.
I think training contracts are pretty much the same as Courtney was just outlined. You have to make your application pop because the competition is so high. And if you were sitting there sifting through 100, 200 training contracts that were more or less, applications will more or less say the same kind of thing, be the same kind of applicant, what is going to make a difference? And actually, the person who's sitting there is going to think about a number of things. What's interesting about this person compared to everybody else? Why would they fit into this particular firm? And secondly, if I'm going to be working with them, what would interest me in them? And one of the things I always say to people is that you can make that CV pop by doing more things, getting involved in voluntary work, getting involved in, if you have the time, you can always find a little bit of time to do something that expands your experience, maybe shows a bit of leadership, and maybe plays into the field of law that you want to get into, because you're going to have to make yourself stand out in some way, and just the academics and a little bit of work experience these days on its own is not going to do it. And I think it's quite right that you need to really think about how you can do something slightly different. The other thing I would say as well, and I found this with every single person that I've mentored when I've looked at their CV, it's a thing you haven't put down there that would make your CV pop because you think it's not going to be of interest. The number of times I've come across someone, doing something really interesting, or they've had a real challenge in life, say, to get to where they've got to, and they haven't put that down because they didn't think it was relevant. And I would just say to all of you, think about the things that you put on a piece of paper, all the stuff you thought that wasn't relevant, that you didn't put in your CV, and see which of those, if you actually put it in, would make it pop. Because it's often the stuff people leave out because they try and normalise it. There's actually the really interesting thing that might actually catch someone's eye.
I just really wanted to add there, and Sandy touched on it, the importance of mentoring. I did mention it in my top 3 tips. Get yourself a mentor, because as much as you think you've been on a course, you often need someone to sit down and pick out with you the points about your CV that will pop, because it's not that easy. So don't underestimate the need to get someone. It's so competitive now. Just good qualification, a bit of work experience is not enough.
Again, a very important question and probably relevant to many of you in the audience. So I just asked David to offer any word of advice that he has also.
Well, the thing is, you can't really make an assumption that all the things that are interesting about you are things you've done, like it's been said before, your academic and stuff, but it's things you can actually create. I mean, you can create a law case out of thin air. You can go looking for it. And in that way, you distinguish yourself. For example, you might find something in a sphere that you're working in. I was working in exclusion and found that young people who didn't have citizenship could not go on the French courses when these students go to France on a trip. And I said that's effectively an exclusion. This is no exclusion. We're not excluding them from school. We are excluding them from school. If you decided that the curriculum is about going to France and these students can't go because they're not citizens, then that is discrimination as exclusion. Actually, you're creating a case out of just something that is in your community. It's not just the rules and the things that are established. You can actually establish a point of law within your own community and be distinguished by that. And I think any firm or chambers would be interested in that as well.
Coming close, I know, very close in time to news yet. A question, yes, young lady in there.
My name is Bilal Birade. I'm currently doing a graduate diploma in law, the law conservation course, and it's probably mainly a question to you three. I don't think it's a problem, but some people might see it as one. I've got very strong politics, and for chambers like Tooks and Garden Court and Doughty Street, that's supposedly quite a good thing, but I was wondering how much your politics does inform your, because for me that's the reason why I actually wanted to get into law in the first place, and whether or not you find it conflicting with some of the work that you do.
When you say it's positive, is what we heard.
I mean, I've done my research as well, and quite literally you are the only 3 chambers that are very explicit about their politics, which for me is a very good thing, but a lot of other chambers tend to be very quiet about it, which I personally don't like, but you know, as the luck of the draw may go, I may end up somewhere else. You know, I just want to know whether or not I have my head in the clouds slightly by thinking that everything we do is informed by what I know about the political nature of your chambers, or whether or not you at times find yourself doing things that conflict with the political beliefs.
Well, I think Andy's going to answer that, but certainly he's heard some of my political rants over the last 6 weeks that we've been doing this case. I'm coming complaining about some state of society every morning, and soon enough he's going to say you've got chicken to show. Andy?
I did this job A, because I love it, and B, because of my politics. And I came in to do criminal law for the same reasons I suspect you're interested in being a lawyer. And it does it gets you up in the morning, it keeps you awake late at night when you're focusing on the case and practicing stuff. And we're fortunate because we're in the sort of chambers who aren't afraid to take on cases. So, you know, we've all spent our formative years in the Tottenham riots and miners' strikes, and you know we can set out our CVs and I can show the scars from years of fighting those cases. And I'm very lucky to be in that sort of position. But even if you're in a more traditional chambers where politics don't necessarily drive your day job, you can get involved in political activities as a lawyer. The Bar Human Rights Committee, for example, and make a really significant contribution. And there are lots of other organisations, Liberty, Justice, all of these things. You take your legal skills to and your determination, and you make your contribution there.
Paul, if you want to add?
I just want to add this. I wouldn't say that Garden Court is political with a capital P in the party political sense. But politics necessarily must inform the work of any lawyer. Take at first blush, the case we're doing, the 7 young men who are involved in this murder and attempted murder, might seem to be totally apolitical. But when it comes to addressing a jury in a case like that, you need to appreciate the sociology and the politics of the estates in Peckham, which produced the anger being exhibited by these young people. If you are going to translate the evidence into terms that a jury of 12 people are going to understand, that's the extent to which I think politics involve and informs my work as a lawyer. But as Andrew rightly observes, there are many opportunities to display that political consciousness outside of the courtroom by joining, you know, human rights organizations and other such groups. So I don't think you should be seeing it as a limiting factor at all, but as something which is, to my mind, very empowering.
Unfortunately, just take
just one observation on that. I was at a course recently, and someone put up on the screen a picture on one side of Obama, Clinton, and Tony Blair, and a picture on the other side of the screen of Angela Merkel, Sarkozy, and someone else I can't remember. And you probably all got this already, but you had to kind of, you know, work out what it is. And the fact is, obviously, Obama and others are all lawyers, all trained as lawyers, and the others had all trained as economists. And the point this chap was making was the way they had trained and what they had done totally dictated the way they ran their countries. And I would say to you, when you look around, there's this great book called The Greatest Speeches Ever Made, and they're all by political leaders. So many of them are lawyers. And so I don't think you can really, actually, whatever you do, whatever branch of law, you can really separate the politics from the law.
No,
they're very closely connected. Exactly.
There's a very long list.
My turn. Right. Well, okay, sorry. We've come to the end of our time, insofar as this part of the evening is concerned. But just before I let you go, can I remind you of two things? For those of you who are in practice and require some further training, please sign, whether you are solicitor or barrister and you need your CPD points for the end of the year, please sign, all right? You have some evaluation sheets, I think, on your seats. Could you please complete those and hand those in? And even the panelists on the CPD points, you all know how valuable those are. Could you pass those down, please? And there are going to be refreshments outside. You remain in the confines of the Supreme Court, in and around this area, no wandering off, tempting as though it may be. And can I thank the panelists for their appearance and attendance here tonight. A fantastic panel. I've missed Jill Scott for this. So those of you who know Jill Scott, I've missed Jill Scott at Brixton Academy for this, but it was well worth it. And can I ask you just for a round of applause for the panel? And I hope that some of our panelists will stay afterwards so you have the opportunity to network and perhaps ask some more questions if you didn't get the opportunity to do so before now. So,
I'm just going to keep it short and sweet. I just want to thank everybody for coming along today. I hope you found it really useful. We really do appreciate your feedback, your tweets, and we appreciate you coming out today. I know that it was difficult for a lot of you to get here, but we do need your support. So as we move forward into 2012, sorry, can you hear me? Mm-hmm. No? Okay. I can't stand in these hills and lean on this very well. So as we move into 2012, in order for us to grow and to continue to do what we do, we need your support. We're here today because Ben at the Supreme Court has seen what we did and he's decided to support us. The panelists are all here because they also share our passion. But we always need speakers, we always need venues, and we always need people like yourselves to come and share your story, because there's always somebody else that can learn from you. Our philosophy is each one teach one. So I hope today you can go home and share your stories with somebody else, but I also hope that you'll come back and share it with us so that we can continue to share it with everybody else. So thank you very much. Please enjoy the refreshments outside. Before you come and rush all the speakers today, I'm just going to get them all to come to the front if that's okay, so we can just get a group shot. Or I can get you two to just come round.
Yes. Perhaps if we can speak to people outside.
Yeah, that's fine afterwards. We are filming it today, so it will go up on our YouTube site. I'd like to say thank you to Roy for Sharp Images for filming it today. He's here volunteering. I'd like to say thank you to Cherise from Sassy PR. She's here, she's doing our publicity today. I'd like to say thank you very much to Runnymede for supporting us and for coming on board. Please do look at Runnymede and follow what they do as well. There are a lot of people that made today happen, the Law Society, Law Works, many of the organisations that have brought the panellists here are supporting us in the background. So in order for us to grow, we need your support. So do sign up to our website or our mailing list so you can keep in touch and so that we can keep in touch with you. Thank you very much.